This is the NeoBooks call for Monday, December 23rd, 2024, the day before Christmas Eve, which is a little bit crazy. Our next call will be just before New Year's Eve, and that's crazy too, because then we'll be in 2025. I'm afraid I'm only here for the first half of this call. I have to have a command performance to be on another call at the half hour. So I will pass the con to whoever wants to take the con. You're welcome to go until late evening if you want. You're welcome to celebrate Christmas in the Zoom if that's what flips your trigger, but I don't think so. Anyway, we had a really interesting FJB call a moment ago. Jack and Marc-Antoine were both on it, but we dove partly into, I was asking Marc-Antoine about his mind meld with you, Jose, about structures and seeing people's underlying beliefs. But then we had a really nice riff into a bunch of different books and such about how do people form beliefs? How do they change beliefs? Where does this all come from? That kind of thing. So I will share the link to my brain notes have links to most of those books right now. So I'll share a link to that in the chat right now. And then Marc-Antoine, did you want to add to that or jump in there somewhere?
No, that was an unrelated question. There were two conversations really, and they're related, of course. But the one was a friend of mine asking me for references for how do people form beliefs, and we dove into everything we know about this. It's really interesting. But the first question was from Jerry. It's like, how do we create a real global brain? And one thing I shared, which in discussions with Jack, is I've been often speaking about using frames to describe ideas or more precise ideas or more rigorous, more formalized ideas. And I realized really when I speak of frames, I spoke a bit about the layers of frames. And really there's kind of four layers that I've been kind of commingling. One is, the claims, the facts, uh, the configuration between the claims and facts, such as what is, well, the schemas for the configuration of claims and facts, right? Saying, oh, implication, if you have many participants in a certain configuration, that's a pattern. So what are the patterns? Not just the facts themselves are instances of the patterns, but what are the patterns that hold these facts together? That's another layer. And above that, there's kind of what are the worldviews that organize certain patterns that enable or make certain patterns ultra visible or ultra invisible. And above that, there's the patterns of bridging. How do we bridge worldviews? And each of those layers is worth commons. It's worth a federated database, a frame of reference, and how do we view this fact as this pattern embedded in this worldview that could be submitted to this bridge to look at it from another worldview. But going from facts to patterns is one mental leap. Going from patterns to worldviews is another mental leap. And going from worldviews to bridges between worldviews is another mental meta leap. And I think we need all four to be things we're able to talk about and reason about. They need to be made into things. And we have a lot of, basically, databases are mostly about information, not even really knowledge, but very much at the first level. Ontologies are kind of second level, kind of, but the other two levels I hadn't seen modeled so much. And then Jerry said, I should talk to you, Jose, about if you see those levels, how you see them, how you describe them. I have a very strong intuition that nested frames are the way to do the first three levels. I'm not sure about the fourth. Still thinking through that. You're muted.
Yeah, that's very consistent with, I mean, I think you've laid it out a little bit more clearly than I have. But I think that ultimately that's kind of the way that I've been seeing it. And understanding that it is my worldview that defines how I'm able to see things. And that worldview if I hold that worldview, I'm not wrong in seeing what I see. What I
Of course.
perceive to be is what I perceive to be based on that worldview. And so very
Yes.
often we disagree on the thing, not because we're looking at, we have different views about the same thing, but because we see different things.
Well, let me put it this way. I think we're never wrong to see the things we see, and we're always wrong to think it's the only way to see things.
Yes.
But that's
But that's that, as you said, that's going up to the level of understanding of what is the basis of why I see what I see.
yeah.
And that
But
basis of what I see, I was thinking less of a worldview, though that is very much what it is,
yeah.
and more of sort of, rather than going up to my worldview, down to my beliefs that make up that worldview, and that those beliefs then are directly connected to the thing that I have an opinion about. And so that's kind of in the past, when I've shown a spreadsheet here, is sort of like, well, how do I see the world? I see it as in a scientific lens, and therefore I see that things are black and white in a certain way, and I see that things are blah, blah, blah. And that process, then you can see, oh, what you just said makes no sense. It makes no sense based on what you said you believe.
Right.
Right? Not that it may not make sense to me, but I believe in different things. So that doesn't matter what I believe.
There's a question of consistency. You're absolutely
Yes.
right. Just quickly, this, I just want to show this. This is a slide I made about nested frames as a unit of knowledge, saying, between discourse and kind of more structured information data, what I'm proposing is frames as a unit of knowledge representation. In frames, I said there's so many layers. Like Charles Fillmore had linguistic action frames. I don't know if the image is visible for you, but this should be.
Yes.
So those are, John gives a car to Mary. That's an action frame. But even causality is at that level. Marvin Minsky kind of went from there to knowledge representation and kind of more ontology. Lakoff had metaphorical frames in Metaphors We Live By. Walton had argumentation schemes. I keep brandishing that book, but that's a layer higher, right? The metaphors kind of describes kind of links between knowledge representation frame or action frames, and argumentation frames are, yes, but here's the causal link between those. It's one level higher. And then you have George Kelly and personal constructs, like kind of personal theories. And Jack should speak more about that. He knows it better than I. Irving Goffman, the dramaturgic frames, the notion that we're always doing this, putting ourselves on stage with a certain persona, and that the persona dictates how we'll present a certain number of things. And this also goes back to Lakoff and his notion of political frames, and something that's missing in that slide is everything that's been done in the design pattern world. A lot of it, like the wise democracy patterns, for example, they're very much at these higher level frames. But for example, the architectural patterns were more, I don't know at which layer exactly, or of course the software design patterns, which are the ones I know best. But what I'm saying is I'm very much trying to say there's these layers of frames, one's building on another, and making that nesting explicit. It's also saying, oh, if you've identified this frame, these are the super frames it could be part of. And if you have this super frame, here are the implicit subframes that it expects. And sometimes, in the case of argumentation schemes, Walton, he identifies, well, and here's also the frames that could defeat it. Here is the weakness of that argumentation.
And I'm especially interested in what the Muggle viewer is that lets you understand this and have a discussion around it. Meaning, this could look very theoretical and very code-ish, Or is there a way of representing this so that two ordinary folks can go, wow, you said this, I said that, but if we compare notes on what's under what we said, they're really
Yes.
different or really similar.
Well, go ahead.
I think it's why I'm so interested in nesting, because if you have different frames that have the same underlying elementary subframes, it's easier to connect. Okay, we agree on this part, this part, this part, and it's really at the more interpretative stage that we're beginning to differ in the interpretative superframes. But identifying the visible kind of elementary action subframes helps also say, okay, what do we agree or disagree on? But a lot of it is interpretation, and that's fine. But then we can name it. If the interpretation is a kind of a layer above the observation explicitly, it makes it easier to detach one from the other. Now, Muggle view, I do think for me, a frame is very much key value slot. But when we speak about nesting frames, I would have oh, by the way, this contains this, which connects this and this, and this contains this, which contains this and this. So I've shown you my, maybe not in this one, more in the FJB call, my beads line, the Kipu view of arguments, which I think might make it legible, but that's a kind of advanced tool. We need simpler tool, I think, for Muggles, but still saying this is the frame, these are the roles, like it's a scene, right? It's and here government's useful. This is a scene, it's an archetypical scene. Here are the actors, and this is here we have this person or this idea playing that role in that scene. The actor role casting metaphor that we've inherited from topic mapping, thank you very much, I think is a very, very potent metaphor for what's going on. We are so much reusing plays and saying, here's the play, here's the casting, and here how it play out here.
I was just going to say that I think that ultimately this interface has got to be AI. And that as much as, I mean, for the Muggles, right? As much as the folks that need to do some of this work need to understand it at the level that we're just talking about it, and need to be able to be engaged at this level. I think very few people will want to be engaged in that level, and that's fine. I think in part because the intention here is not to teach people the structure per se, right? I think the intent is to show people that things are bound to other things, and that if you are going to make logical arguments, you need to understand that, and that if your logical arguments don't have a basis by which it stands up, then it doesn't make sense. And if you can have those kinds of conversations about any topic that we would put in a book for a NeoBook, then being able to have that understanding of, I'm looking at this specific topic within a NeoBook. Here's all the stuff that's backing it up. Here's all the stuff that's behind it. And not by teaching you all of the frame structures and all the different layers and all of that, but by pointing out, hey, here's where there's a hole in this line of thinking. And it's this hole in this way, can you see that hole? And because of that, this line of thinking may not be as sound as you might think it is. And that type of argumentation with the user from a place of, is this a sound thing to be thinking about? I find myself, whenever I'm looking for research to validate an intuition that I have, trying to find those holes, right? And for me, it's like, I know there's a potential that I'm wrong here, So far I found a whole bunch of things that support it, but what are the things that don't support it? And it's harder to find the things that don't support something than it is to find something that does support something.
Thanks.
Can I respond,
Stacy?
Stacy, or are you directly on that?
It's directly on this. I just want to clarify
Cool.
something. Did I just hear you? Did I just hear that the purpose of doing all this is to teach people how to make logical arguments? And I ask that because we already have the data that shows that people don't make, they don't make decisions based on logic. So that's why I'm bringing it up.
It's perfectly valid. Okay, Jose, I will beg to disagree up to a point, but agree up to a point. And yes, I'll try to respond to what you're saying, Stacey. First, yes, people don't base themselves on logic that much, but that I would argue is partly training. And yeah, not everybody is good at it, but also I think a lot more people could become good at it if they could probably be trained into it. And I think one difficulty is people are not trained to see in relationships. They're trained to look at things, and being able to name the frames would make it easier for people to think about the frames. But that's a hypothesis. My aim is, Jack and I have been working on SenseCraft as a way to teach people to get better at sense making and understanding one another, and that's a narrative function, and kind of thinking together, and that's a logical function. Now, will they approach it, and where I do agree with Jose, so I think, yes, there is for me a goal to help them to learn frames. Where I do agree with Jose is I don't think people will want to play that game. That's totally true. And getting them to interact with frame representations is going to be a very uphill move. And that's why I see totally a role for AI as an interpret, as a guide to get them slowly to engage. But there, I do think it should be in a way that gets them to see, okay, here's the narrative form and here's the structural form, so that slowly they learn to read the structural form. Why? Because it's more efficient, it's more, and what I contend, it's that it's easier to compare and combine structural forms than language. And that's why I want people to become cognizant of, progressively, slowly, of structural forms. And the other reason is, for me, one big aim is transparency of governance. And we cannot have transparency of governance if the arguments for decisions are vague and hand-wavy. And helping people to learn to understand more rigorous arguments is totally part of the goal for transparency and democracy. Over. Jerry, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. Just as a little bit of lateral evidence for what you're saying, and I agree that we spent a bunch of time in OGM and other places about how emotion and membership trump reason most of the time. But there's a bunch of research that's coming out that says that machine learning can raise the lowest performers up to being average performers or better than. And that's really interesting. It's sometimes not as good a benefit for the top performers, but it brings the bottom up. And that's in a work setting with work tasks, blah, blah, blah. But maybe we can carry this over into civic life and social life, because we are so conditioned to just respond knee-jerk to everything that we're not actually engaging system to almost ever. So we're much more likely to drop to just an emotional gut reaction and ignore facts or whatever else. If there was something that was raising our level of awareness and processing of what's going on in the world, let's call them facts again for just a second, because I'm very old school that way, we might in fact raise the level of civic discourse without doing anything official or structural or different. It might just get us to be less knee-jerk about all the stuff that's going on around us. And Stacey, you may not share that hope, but that is one of my wishes.
No, I think I do share that.
Awesome. Awesome. And you're saying in the chat you wanted to get back to governance. Do you want to say which part of that? What do you mean?
Just real quickly, I just wanted to say to Marc-Antoine's point, I'm not sure that everyone needs to have that skill. I think that there's a middle layer that needs to have that skill and that they can then present the argument. I think to expect everybody to get that skill, I don't know that that's realistic. And the other thing I want to say to that is I think part of that requires removing of certain information. At least that's what I found in my life to help with the way I structure my arguments with people, is to remove all the noise as much as possible. That is very helpful.
Can I answer quickly to that before Rick goes on? I think I agree with you up to a point. Not everybody will get into that. I mean, how many people didn't vote in that damned election, right? Because they couldn't be made to care. Liquid democracy is the idea that if you don't know or understand an issue, but you trust someone else to understand it, you can give your vote to that person. And I think it's perfectly appropriate to have kind of delegation mechanisms for people who don't want to engage. That said, the goal is that all the information is kind of presented fractally, so that there's a kind, here's the broad strokes, and you can dive in on things you care about if you want. So this is another advantage of structure. Instead of saying, oh, I have to read this huge platform, you can go into very much have a inverted pyramid on anything. And I think it's what I call transparency is the fact that the basis of decision should always be available. And I think that is fundamental. Like the notion that people can take decisions and we don't know why they took the decision, I think that's a perversion of democracy in and of itself. Over. Rick.
Rick, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, I've been speaking. I feel like I'm sort of catching up because I've been away for a few weeks. But I just put a couple of questions into the chat there in response to it. One comes from I was at a conference where there was a research group, qualitative research group, talking about the missing link in much of qualitative and quantitative research, which is the concept of reflexivity. And that goes along with metacognition, meta-learning, and you know, it's really, I mean, earlier when you were talking about the worldviews, well, you have to say, well, what, and similarly, what Jose was, what is it that contributes to that particular worldview? And what is the, you know, unless we look inside the black box of that, then it's very difficult to go any further and to extrapolate. And actually, as you were doing this, I was doing I come up with this framing of neo-learning as the ability to co-create human AI synergies in real time. I'm using it all the time now when I'm listening to groups and whatever. I've got ideas, I put questions into whatever. And even thinking about how to use that more iteratively and in this group even, or many other groups, where you're actually using something in advance. So for example, everything you just said, Antoine, if for example, there was one question that could be the launching pad for a dialogue, a generative strategic dialogue, I'm just giving you two examples here, that one would actually go through and read about this. I mean, these pages could be published on Perplexity AI, and that becomes then the sort of a substrate or fodder for ongoing dialogue. And actually, Jerry, when you were talking earlier about, you know, helping to raise the base, I think you can use AI at every level to raise things up.
It does that. Yes, it's just really effective at the base.
Yeah, well, I think it's even more so at the top actually, because we're not good neo-learners yet. And just because we don't have the skills yet to do it doesn't mean to say that the ceiling cannot be broken through as well as raising the floor. So actually, I've become more optimistic about how to use AI in a much more creative way And I'll just give you one example. Somebody, wrote a very sophisticated right-wing writer, one of the best I've ever seen, who was tearing Biden apart and elevating Trump. And this guy he was bright, but I just looked at it and I thought, the premises upon which you're deconstructing Biden's perspective and demeaning him and belittling him and making him look small, and of course, elevating Trump, was actually quite impressive. So I actually went to AI and I asked it to compare and contrast the accomplishments and the shortcomings of Trump and Biden. And I had about 8 prompts for the different domains of, different various of public policy. And actually, I looked over it and I thought, that's quite good. Now, imagine if you've got people who could at least momentarily suspend their political biases and say, let's just have a look at this. And let's be aware that when we, whether it's a left or right-wing perspective, that we have a way of minimizing your opposition and maximizing your proponent. And, it's that bias game that you try and tar and feather your opponent on the one hand, and you convert their strengths into weaknesses and vice versa. It goes on all the time. You can see that all the time. And if people can just create, Jerry, you talk about being a safe, trusting, but if you can lower the emotional reactivity in those environments where people can actually say, hey, this is why I'm thinking this way. So it's really getting at metacognition, and it's getting at meta learning. It's developing the skills of reflexivity, which we're very poor at doing, which is why is it do we have the worldview we have? And then if you escalate that up to the meta level that you were talking about, Antoine, then you have to look at, well, what is the meta governance? Because I don't think we should be focusing just at government. We've got to look at the meta governance. So, I mean, it's, another way of looking at your, the nested framing of how you look at things from different perspectives. And we're not very good at talking about it, which we're trying to do now. But I think even this group could become more sophisticated in using how it uses AI. So if we extrapolate one major question, whatever it might be that emerges out this, and we actually have some ongoing iterative conversations rather, and make them more effective at creating a coherence of engagement longitudinally over time. And if we could do that more effectively, then we wouldn't be victim to the lizard brains, the lizard brain manipulators of the world who are very effective at mobilizing emotion over reason. So anyway, that's my reaction.
I have to boogie to the other call that I need to join. I'm going to pass. Jose, is it okay if I pass you the com?
I was hoping to sort of wrap up myself.
Sneak away before. Okay. Who else thinks they'll be here for the whole call?
I'll take it.
Sounds great. I'll pass it to you, Marc-Antoine. And you can sort out with Stacy, but I need to boogie. So thank you very much. And I'm sorry. I love where this conversation is. So
Pleasure.
there we go.
Jose, if you're going, do you have something you want to say before Stacy goes and before I respond to Rick?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Stacy, can I respond to Rick or do you want to go first?
I want to respond to Rick too, and I'll forget.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Go.
To go back to Rick's first point and where he ended up, and I think this is relevant. So this weekend I went to Sam Hahn's call to visit them for the holidays, and my friend Joshua was there, and I got them to play with Notebook LM with me, and I had them put in Rich Hickey's talk. And the reason I usually want those short podcasts is so that I can use it to go downstream and have conversations with people. But in this instance, aside from that, I had you in mind, Marc-Antoine, because I wanted to be able to use the transcript from that podcast to sort of bring out when I was talking about on last week's Free Jerry's Call, the 3 and the 4. I thought, I didn't get to go through the transcript, but my intention was to be able to use that podcast, which is on a higher level than I'm capable of having a fuller conversation on, but to take enough of, like when Rick is talking about that central question, that's how I'm seeing it. So I just wanted to share that. You're muted, Rick.
if I could quickly respond to that, I just came from another AI call where I had this conversation about how to use Perplexity AI in different ways. So just on the theme you just said, I can write a paragraph that a lot of people can't understand. On the other hand, but it contains the essence of what I'm thinking. And of course, that just triggers the typical anti-intellectual reaction that you get from people. I don't know what do you mean by wicked problem or whatever it is, you know? Well, the nice thing about AI, and Klaus does this very well, is that I can go and I can put a little AI simplification. So it translates, and I can do it to a 6th grade or 12th grade reading level. On the flip side of that, for people who think this is sort of superficial fluff, I can say, here's the AI elaboration. If you want to go deeper into this, this is how you, so the ability to look at things at various levels of complexities of understanding, you can do that. And so that's one technique. And the other technique is make it, I just started this with this one question. Oh, there's 2 questions there. And you can then dive into it and trigger a whole series of questions that cascade. It's almost like a nestled framing of questions. And then you can ask it to summarize it. Now, it doesn't always summarize it that well, but then you can go in and you can tweak it by changing the prompts in it to generate information. What that does is it really quickly gets at some complex issues much more quickly than we can do in this conversation. But it can create, if we agreed that we would read this one-page summary on this one question, the level of discourse and dialogue would be much higher than if we just conducted in a sort of ad lib fashion. So this comes back to how to use AI much more effectively for neo-learning so that we can co-create human AI synergies so that we don't become victims of our worldviews.
Okay, let me first address the first question you asked, and then I'll come back to the AI synergy, because because it's easier to handle. When I speak about layers, it's very much about going meta from one layer to the other. And I think that being able to have visual/language representation of the higher levels is essential to make it easier for people to go meta. I think being able to name the higher level patterns is essential for having conversations that involve the meta patterns without having to reinvent those wheels every single time. So that's one thing. So I'm very much with you on the metacognition, meta thinking. The whole point is to train people into becoming aware of the meta level, and of course self-examination and yada yada yada. But the notion that we need to enrich our language capacity to make it easier to express meta level patterns. That's what I'm pushing at a certain level. And to create a commons, there's the number of meta patterns is infinite. So we won't have, when I say create words for meta patterns, for the more common one, of course, but it's going to be always negotiated, always common. And for me, that's another advantage of nesting. You can describe a hypothetical new complex pattern in terms of known patterns. And I think, and this is why it's so important that it's a commons and that it's a commons that people can enrich. Okay, so that I don't think there's anything that controversial in this group here, except maybe the creating a new language stuff, which is a bit of a big deal. And of course, that means huge learning curve. But I do think showing, and here that I see as a role of AI, explaining to people in natural language while showing the higher level patterns so that people can get habituated, can get exposed to higher level patterns in a symbolic view. For me, the importance of having the symbolic view as objects that can be manipulated is, as long as it's AI, I mean, AI is not quote unquote reproducible. Like if I ask the same prompt, I might get a different answer. And if you're trying to create a shared commons of these are the patterns we identified, I don't trust the AI to consistently know about all the cases. I think it's perfectly appropriate to ask, here are the patterns. Basically have a graph RAG. If you're, there's a lot of work on hybrid graph and language LLM usage. Use the LLM as a way to talk with the knowledge graph and eventually enrich it. That is less common, but I think it's not that much of a stretch. Using AI also to help people who are not familiar with the graph vocabulary to, okay, here's what I want to say, how to make that into a formal structure. That's totally legitimate. You don't know the formal structure yet, something you're learning. So AI as an intermediate and translator, totally as a coach, but AI as the repository of knowledge. I mean, the reality is AI will know what it's being trained on. And if we come up with new ideas, and for me, what's interesting is the emergence of new ideas, it may reinvent them from one prompt to another or not. And so it needs to be able to talk to this knowledge repository, which exists somewhere else. So that's my opinion on how to do this synergy. I think we need to have the knowledge as knowledge objects, of which we've spoken a lot in NeoBooks, more as reusable text, but I'm saying as reusable structures also, because of course they also need a natural language expression, or maybe the natural expression can always be generated by AI. I don't have a problem with that, because natural language expression is always going to be contextual. I'm fine, but it needs to be something else elsewhere, because I don't trust the AI to reliably represent the accretion of knowledge. Stocks with versus flow, we speak of that again. We're in a conversation, that's flow, but we're trying to create this stock of knowledge that we can build on, like, a bridge, stone over stone. And with its very weird memory, I don't trust the LLM to do that for me. Over.
I don't even think it's a question of trust. I think it's a question of it's just fodder. It's just ways of generating different perspectives, and that's where the human element has to come in. So in terms of meaning making, sense making, purpose clarification, that is where but it can enable us to be able to, it can generate things far quicker than we can think. It can create frameworks and whatever. It can create different frameworks. You can put the same question. You can use different AI tools. But what it helps to do is to create a ricochet effect, that it will evoke more reactions as a consequence of that in a very short period of time, to be able to generate a dialogue that will be far more enriched than if you don't. And that's what I'm interested in. That's the reason why I've been working on this for a while. I'm just becoming public with it in terms of neo-learning and how to do it. I agree, there's lots of constraints and limitation of AI. There's no question about it. On the other hand, it's got an amazing capacity to be able to reach out and connect things in a way. Then it behoves us to be able to, okay, what is it that we don't like or like about this? And if it's done in a community where you're doing this and you're getting at the nuances, then it becomes a much more substantive dialogue. Anyway, hand off to someone.
No objection there, Stacy.
Yeah, so this is a slightly different take, and it speaks to trust and misinformation. Also on Saturday, I got the chance to see OpenAI's chat being demonstrated, and we were playing with it. And so we wanted to know if it could notice anybody's cortisol levels being raised. So, we role played, we were yelling, and it didn't. And it wound up telling us that it knew we were being lighthearted about it. And trust me, most of you would have been fooled by my performance, but AI was not. That being said, I then asked my friend a question. And again, because I do not have that information, I have to just trust that what he's telling me is true and not coming through his filter. And most people do speak through their own biases, and not everybody's great at removing biases. And so I asked the chat, if Josh had told me something that was inaccurate, would you have corrected him? And it said yes. And to me, that would be a wonderful thing, to have a chat in the room that could step in when somebody says something that's inaccurate. That's the role I want to see it in. Why?
Um,
People are there for guardrails. It's not like it's not like we're giving them, the nuclear codes. We're just asking them to turn a light on so that people can pay attention and discuss it.
Listen, I think that yes, getting AI to identify biases could be a wonderful application if you trust AI more than I do. There's clearly right now a lot of work of people who want to influence public discourse, who are trying to do it by tuning the input of AI training so that AI comes up with certain biases. But AI is going to be politicized. That's just a reality. Training AI requires enormous capital, like creating a new AI model takes enormous capital. It's not easy to do it in a, democratic shoestring lab, unlike a lot of programming before that. And that means most of it will be controlled by corporations, governments, and introducing biases in AI is a domain effective research. So I'm not against asking AI to flag things, but I am very worried about weaponized bias in AI.
Well, I would also say specifically in high-level conversations like this is where I'd want to see it used, not with regular people. I'd want to see it where the people that are in control and have the power to change things, where you guys are held accountable, to be honest.
Fair.
If I could just quickly respond to the issue of bias, though, I mean, that's, and when I asked it to compare Trump and whatever, you could have a group of people go through that amount of information and say, where do you think AI was biased in this? And you're going to get different people because different people have different biases and they're going to interpret it differently. But that's getting into a meta level. But nonetheless, you can have that conversation, and then you can come back once you've had that dialogue and say, well, to what extent has this dialogue changed your perceptions of how you look at those things? Now, what's interesting, when I did I deliberately put my biases in at the very beginning of this, because I put in my biases such as, who was most effective in following through the campaign promises? How would you compare and contrast their integrity and truth telling between the two candidates? And those two questions are irrelevant to most right-wing leaning people. They don't care. They don't give a shit about how much line goes on. It doesn't matter it's irrelevant because his weaknesses are totally and utterly ignored. If you can't even have a conversation about that, then it's very difficult for people to move out of their emotional reactivity of their biases. They're just going to stay and regurgitate the same old shit, the same old tropes, etc. And unless you have a conversation where you can point that out, I just had somebody on LinkedIn where I point this out. He came back with the typical sort of right-wing bias against equity, saying it's equal outcome and equal ever. And I just, so I sent him a piece of my blog post that focuses just on that one issue alone. And I'm waiting. And he said, very condescending, I look forward to learning about your narrative to explain this. I thought, oh my God, give me a break. So.
And there, before Klaus quickly, I agree totally that going meta is absolutely important. Being like, we don't even agree on the criteria of judgment, right? We don't even agree on the frame of analysis. But being able to point that out, I think, is hugely important. And being able to have the conversation, okay, what do you think should be the frame of analysis to judging the candidate? And having that conversation would be hugely productive, I think.
It's getting out of the amygdala brain and saying, okay, let's just go up a little higher and think this through a little bit.
Klaus.
Yes. So I mean, I trained the AI agent that have been working with for going on 2 years by starting with the NeoBook development here, basically through an evolutionary understanding of our species. And I embedded Tolstoy, the Stoics, the Bible, the Hindus, I mean, basically every religion, and
The sutras, I hope.
what's that?
The sutras, I hope.
The sutras.
As a Buddhist.
Yeah, no, it's the sutras, yeah, and with Tolstoy was the Hindu, and I mean in his thinking. So basically, and then into modern era, right? And so when I ask a question, I'm asking it in view of what do you know about the human animal, right? How we are programmed, how we're wired. Because this basically hasn't changed in 10,000 years, right? I mean, you can read old texts and my gosh, what exactly are we doing different today than we did then, right? When you read Plato, and all or you watch a play by Goethe or by
It is quite fascinating. Anyway, I'll let you finish.
Yeah, so to carry this into the modern era, the responses I get from AI are based on evolutionary evidence now of humanity, of our species, and it's pretty spot on. It may have my biases, maybe these are biases I have introduced, but when you ask it, what do you think of the incoming presidency, Trump, and so on, it's like spot on in my way of thinking, at least, in how it assesses the political reality and the political environment. So this is in some form meta level thinking, but the NeoBooks that I've written with the AI, right, by asking questions through the AI, giving it stimuli material, and then developing chapter after chapter. So theory U, spiral dynamics is in there. I mean, that's as good as it gets as to where we are today, what we know about ourselves, right? So when you assume that AI understands that, and the AI is trained on that, and then incorporates whatever phenomena you ask it to evaluate, and it looks at it through that lens, you get a pretty decent answer coming out of it.
I'd like to see, and I can believe that there's a lot of enormous value there. What I wrote in the chat is the human psyche has not changed. I agree totally with you there. On the other hand, because of new social structures and scale, and of course, technical communication and protocols, the resulting social phenomena can be very novel nonetheless, with the same basic psychic structure. And, society matters, right? I mean, if you look at the variety of social forms that have evolved over time, was very impressed by Graeber's analysis of that. Were you in that reading group we had at some point about the dawn of everything? But basically, a lot of social groups, interestingly, will define themselves in contrast to the neighboring social group. And that has been an enormous driver of social variety over the ages. Again, despite starting with absolutely the same psyche, but the moral metaphors and political metaphors and social metaphors, and those are frames, again, frames of self-presentation and self-identification, do shape how we act in society at one level. Though again, there is a common substrate. I don't want to say you're wrong about what you said, but I'm just saying the manifestation can still vary a lot. That's really what I'm trying to say. But yes, I will read your thing.
This is a conversation I had with my chatbot about the mass deportation of illegal aliens, and the economic consequences and so on. And you can see that, I mean, it's pretty rational, a pretty rational discussion, and it does not display any particular bias in my mind. It just evaluates the what is scenario here.
I will definitely have a look at this. And I'm not going to read it now, but I will.
No, of course not. No.
It sounds pretty. When I speak about bias, I will admit a lot of it is more potential at this point than real. A lot of people are criticizing AI right now for milquetoast, both-sidism more than bias. But there have been definitely experiments with creating AIs that hide their bias and will just get them on certain issues in very specific circumstances. But yeah, and there I think having access to a variety of sources is important, and so on and so forth. Maybe it's too conspiratorial, but I do think, as I said, it is under active research. Whether that research has yet influenced the AIs we use, I would expect not yet, but I expect this research to land at some point.
I'm convinced that Elon Musk used his chatbot to profile millions of people and micro-target them. I mean, exactly. with certain messages, which makes elections actually sort of history, because you can micromanage so many different population groups that. I mean, you had Arabs voting for Trump because they were just convinced that was the right thing to do. You had Hispanics voting for Trump. I mean, Puerto Ricans. I mean, it was just incredible how they all had like this one message, that they needed to hear to convince them to go that way. So that was Cambridge Analytica on steroids, I call it.
All right, exactly.
But that's a different thing. That's where the weaponization of AI is taking place.
Yeah, just to follow up on.
Go ahead.
Anton, just to follow a little bit on what you were saying, I think that obviously when how can you create equanimity in doing an assessment of the pros and cons of anything? And sometimes I find that Perplexity AI goes far too into impartiality. I mean, it's bending over backwards, and you have to actually encourage it to be less impartial, so to speak, because it's such a vanilla response that it's just fluff. So I think one of the struggles is when you're asking it to do a sort of a complex reasoning about the upsides and downsides of any dichotomy, just as I did with Trump versus Biden, how well does it do it? And that's where I think the human factor has to come in, and people have to have a discussion about whether they think this is a reasonable assessment or not.
I'll keep saying the same thing. I never ask an AI about reasonable assessment, but getting elements for me to reason about, I think, is extremely relevant and useful and important, because it's true. We have limited perspective, we have filters, and AI will bring more. It's absorbed all these viewpoints, and it will regurgitate them on demand. And being able to access those viewpoints gets us out of our bubble. That is infinitely useful.
Yeah, but actually, Klaas, I want to come back to you in terms of your 2 years of what you work, of what you describe. Is that is that something you just develop for yourself, or can somebody else access what you developed?
So what I can do is develop an agent, an AI agent coming out of this space. So, and I have done that. They're highly specialized for subtopics, but the basic AI it's a ChatGPT 4.0. It's completely customized to me.
I see. Okay.
And so it's actually really an extension of how I think.
Yeah.
Because I gave it everything that is dear and valued to me. For example, I asked it to take Sorokin, do an analysis of the crisis of transition, by Sorokin, and say, how do you see this? Where do you see us? And what kind of role can AI play in this? It's in this link that I posted here, the conversation. So I mean, I truly have embraced Sorokin in his way of thinking, that we are turning from a materialistic society, into a transitional phase. So no, I can't. What I can do is I can ask it questions. I can prompt it. My newsletters basically come out of this AI. Yeah.
I'd love to hear more about them. And if I know it's your own thing, but can you create an agent so that other people? But I want to know. I want to know more about Klaus's worldview. Can I access it so I can say, how does Klaus click? How does he tick? I mean,
I can ask it.
no, well,
how would you describe my worldview?
Well, but let's put it to the test. Does it actually do a good job of capture? I mean, because that's getting into meta thinking. If you can actually get into some of the message framing behind that, can it actually be used to actually do the job of what we've been talking about?
I've seen examples of that, and I thought they were really good. I mean,
Yeah.
put it this way, it mirrored my judgment, so of course I thought it was good.
It was an affirmation. Well, the other thing is to ask the questions. I mean, I often, when somebody writes something that's absolute gibber, as far as I'm concerned, I just simply take it verbatim and I put in and I say, affirm and refute this statement. And it'll come up with a response and some ideas very quickly. I just got it from a family member who was talking about something. I thought, what the are you talking about? And so I used the AI to be able to generate a quick response because I didn't want to waste any mental energy responding to it. And he came up with a really good response. I thought, okay, I'm just going to shoot this back to him.
But then, Rick, I have to call you on this before I go. If the AI was able to figure out what they were talking about, maybe it wasn't gibberish. Maybe you just didn't understand it.
Yeah.
Oh no. This was really wacko stuff. This is alt-right wacko stuff.
Okay.
And I can show you.
There's something really interesting about taking that. Like I've been doing models of, somebody's just brain dump. It was a colleague that Jack recommended to me the other day. And I just let him talk about the thing that he's doing, which is a Web3 thing. And then I just sort of threw that text into, it was Claude, not ChatGPT, but and just asked for a summary. And then I also did a text model of it and just took the key words, which uses machine learning, and put it in, and it was so much more recognizable. You can just see that when people are throwing words at you and it looks like gibberish, there is actually often an underlying thing to it, but
Of course there is.
it's not that obvious. Yeah, it's just trusting that they're still trying to express something. It's just like it's either on the edge, it's so sophisticated, or they're so confused about it because they've never sat down and spent the time working it out. But eventually people do actually work it all out. Well, they work it out. There's more things they're confused. So it just amazes me that when people say gibberish, it's not. often. It's got something there. And
Well,
listening hard.
there is. Well, yeah, you may be misinterpreting or reframing what I'm saying by gibber. Here, I just put in what my family member sent me. Just in, Trump files amicus brief to stop Biden's sale of border wall materials for $5. Such conduct likely constitute a criminal act.
Mm.
Where did this come from?
Now, yeah, exactly. I mean, this is what you call micro targeting. Exactly what you were saying, Klaus. That resonates.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes sense to people.
Yeah.
I have
Well,
Yeah.
And you think, how can you make this shit up? I mean,
I'm invited tomorrow, so I'm going to go. I'm wishing you all a Merry Christmas, but
Merry Christmas.
I need to. Rick is going to appreciate this. So tomorrow I'm going to a very MAGA Christmas party.
Oh.
You said you were doing it, Stacey, full marks to you. I wonder what that looks like with a drink or two.
I told my friend we need to take our own car. I said I can handle 4 hours max. That's it, 4 hours. But okay, I'll see you all next week. Happy holidays.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Bye now.
Hold the sarcasm in your conversation.
Good.
We look forward to the dramas next week. Let's have it. Let's...
Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas to you all. Right.
Goodbye.
We're here or not? Just the
Yes.
stayers. Yeah, while you're here and being recorded or not, are we interested in collective intelligence next year? I watched the video, okay? And then I watched the next couple of TED ones afterwards, or bits of them. One of them is Dame Glennie, whatever, the percussionist who's deaf. Some of the people I've found in other places. The second one was the guy. It's very famous. He's a very famous conductor who makes everybody laugh, and he shows them about one buttock playing. But I'm just listening to these things again, and I'm hearing this sort of wonderful resonance of how when you can get a group in tune, people in tune with one another, really good stuff turns up, and how hard it is to get people to stick around long enough to do it. Here am I, little girl in the middle, curl in the middle of my forehead. I feel like a ring in from Australia, literally. But, Buckinghamshire is living here. He's accessible to me. UTS is not far away. We could do something quite solid here. We really could. And I think, I won't say I'm sick of small contributions. I need to go back over that conference. I think all three of us were there to feel where, some of the synergies coming from. And writing this book on complexity and leadership is really useful at the moment.
Is Seamus there right now?
Is what?
You said Seamus is accessible to you right now. Is he there right now?
Oh, Simon, or who?
Oh, okay. I heard another name, and I was going to ask who it
No,
is.
Simon Buckinghamshire is accessible because it's UTS. It's 3 hours. I can go up there for several days. He's obviously catching up after having run the other event. I think there's a really powerful and useful time. I mean, if we're going to be doing this stuff, we might as well do it in service of the larger conversation. And we've got our own conversation solid enough that we all know and trust each other. We really do. And just the gems, like, that TEDx talk, it's like, I get it. And just, I don't know if you've watched, who was it who recommended it? Whoever, you should. It's great. It's just brilliant.
It was Jerry's recommendation. I haven't watched it yet. We were in this conversation.
Yeah.
You came twice after I explained the idea of frame layers, and that's something I'd like to get into. But see, there's a lot I want to be building, and yes, absolutely.
Well, Jack and I could do, Jack, I don't know if you're up for it. We keep on coming back to a narrative layer that helps us stick together, whether it happens to be a pattern in music, whether it happens to be a facial expression, whether it happens to be some energetic resonance. There's something there that you can't get to. I mean, I just love the fact that Stacey's going to a MAGA Christmas party with alcohol. But that's reporting from the edge, isn't it? Really, you know?
It is.
It is. And she's brave and funny for doing it. I mean, I'm really interested in her experience because that's how it's done.
Speaking as anthropologist, absolutely. You, Dennis.
I hold my breath and read the front page of Fox News every morning. I mean, the framings that they use are just beyond imagination, but it seems to resonate with their tribe. But then you go to Huffington Post and you see the left-wing framings that are pretty outrageous as well. So you asked in Mattermost, Wendy, what I have for the next 2 weeks. The next 2 weeks are reasonably available. There's a couple of chunks that are out, but
It's a few weeks probably, because I've got until the 6th or the 5th of February after we come back on the 9th and 10th, but I'll take my laptop with me. So I'll be sometimes we'll be in the bush, but I'll be able to catch things up. I'm just going to be spending some time with family and some time on the road. But my point is that, you know, I know that there'll be time over January where Buckinghamshire is thinking about this. It's the downtime that you use. And, you know, because we've been working in this way, FJB, and trying to publish with NeoBooks and such, it's an important contribution because it's a collective contribution with very smart people who trust each other. And, you know, that's nothing to shy away